The MinnowBoard brings an open-source approach to Intel architecture. This includes firmware based on the open-source UDK 2010 environment for UEFI. This video demonstrates how to build MinnowBoard firmware under a Microsoft Windows environment. Start by downloading the firmware package from the projects page at uefidk.com. You will need to click through the end-user license agreement before downloading the zip file. The zip file contains the source tree, documentation, firmware update utility, and pre-built firmware images. This video is based on the build instructions included in the zip file. Unzip the source code package to your system. We are using the directory c:\/UEFI\minnow_src in this example. Once the source is unzipped, make sure you have a supported compiler installed before trying to build the firmware. 3 compilers are required for the Windows environment: Microsoft Visual Studio 2008, the Microsoft Windows Driver Development Kit, and the ACPI ASL compiler, version 2013-07-25. The build process supports a number of operating systems and compilers. In this video, we're using Microsoft Windows 7 with the Visual Studio 2008 compiler. Only the Visual C++ components are required for UEFI development. Use the default installation path for the compiler and tools. The build process requires some components not used for normal application development. This means you also need to install the WinDDK and an ACPI compiler. The WinDDK installer can be downloaded using the link provided in the build instructions. Make sure the WinDDK installer is run as administrator and installed in the recommended path from the build instructions. The build instructions also contain the download path for the ACPI compiler. ACPI is used by the operating system for hardware configuration and power management. The MinnowBoard firmware has only been validated with one specific version of the ACPI compiler, so make sure to use the 2013-07-25 version available from acpica.org. Extract the ACPI compiler to the c:\/ASL directory. Once the compilers have been installed, you can start the build process. Open a command prompt as an administrator, change to the UEFI minnow_src directory, and run the EDK setup command to initialize the build environment. The build command for the firmware has a number of command line options, so it's easiest to copy it from the build instructions and paste it onto the command line. Before building, let's review what's going on. The first 4 options set the build environment. -P specifies the project. This is the relative path to the MinnowBoard DSC file. -B specifies the build mode, which is release or debug. -A specifies the build architecture. IA32 is for 32-bit UEFI on Intel processors. -T specifies the compiler, which is important for the build environment. The -D flags are items defined for the MinnowBoard project. Build number and build date can be customized to differentiate your builds from the standard firmware release. The build will take several minutes to complete. Even if you plan to customize the firmware, it's a good idea to build the unmodified source code as a first step. The build process creates multiple firmware volumes, which are collected into a firmware device image that can be programmed onto the MinnowBoard's SPI flash device. The MinnowBoard firmware image file, minnow.fd, is located in subdirectories organized by project, build mode, and compiler. The FV subdirectory contains the FD file, along with other images used in the build process. For tips on flashing the FD file, check out the video MinnowBoard and UEFI Firmware Update Methods.